Hi, this is Ronika Wahi. I'm back with another interview. This time it's with renowned writer Ashok Kumar Banker. Ashok sir has written over 80 books in different genres, and his latest book is a crime thriller. It's his first internationally published full-length novel in the thriller category. It's called A Kiss After Dying. The book is already receiving a lot of good reviews and garnering a lot of attention. And moving forward, Ashok sir has plans to write more thrillers, literary fiction, and also interesting stuff for young readers. He's writing and drawing graphic novels for kids. So thank you so much, sir, for taking the time for this interview. And I'd like to first ask you about the journey you've had. Briefly, if you could tell me about some of the key milestones and some of the most memorable moments that you've had, because you've had this really long journey of writing. So, the best parts that you've had.
Thank you for having me, Ronika. A pleasure to be here. And thank you for your kind words about my work. Uh, it's been a long journey, of course. Yes, I have written a lot of books. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it. At times I feel like I'm just starting out. For example, Kiss After Dying is my first thriller to be published internationally. And so I keep doing what, my passion drives me to write. And it just so happens along the way that I happen to have written a lot of books in different genres. Uh, I I guess you could say I was always a writer. I've been writing from the age of 9 years old, and I've just never stopped writing because I have so many stories, and very often while writing one book, I am inspired to write so many other stories and so many other books that uh, I'm never able to finish. I'm never able to finish telling the stories that I want to tell. So they just keep pouring out, and as long as they keep coming, I'll keep writing.
Great to know that, sir. And one thing I so I saw that this you've written in the thriller genre before. It was in the early 1990s. So there were a few short stories that you'd written, but then you didn't write in this genre, and decades later you've come up with this full length novel. So what prompted you to pick up this genre again after a decades long gap?
Well, the fact that I wrote, as you know, three short novels in the early 1990s, uh, they were published as, as short, as books basically, but they were actually novellas. Uh, there were three of them published in 1992, but the release was delayed by a month because of the Bombay riots. So they actually came out in January of 1993. But actually, they had been finished and they were already printed, ready for release in November of 92. And those were three books called Murder and Champagne, The Iron Bra, and 10 Dead Admen. Of the three of them, I think The Iron Bra is the one that got the most attention and the most amount of, uh, I don't know whether acclaim is the right word, but it got a lot of attention from media uh, critics and literary critics in India. It's still remembered and still thought of very well by a lot of them. And in fact, in recent years, there have been a couple of articles about it, which I was quite surprised to see because it was one of the rare examples of a hard-boiled noir novel. And despite the title, The Iron Bra, the Iron Bra really refers to the woman protagonist who basically has to be tough to survive in a man's world. Hence the title, The Iron Bra. It's a very violent, very realistic noir novel, and that was very rare in India at the time. So the three books got a lot of attention when they were published, when they were released in 93, early 93, and they got a lot of media attention. That was actually the first time that I think a lot of people began to know about me as a writer and hear about me, even though I'd published a couple of children's books earlier. So basically, writing crime fiction, writing thrillers is something that I've always wanted to do, which is why I started my career with children's books and literary fiction and crime. These are the three categories in which I started writing. And it's just that in those days, in the early 90s, the Indian publishing industry was very nascent. Sales were almost nothing. There were very few bookstores. There was no crossword, no landmark, no chain stores, no Amazon, no internet, no Flipkart, nothing. So basically, you just had your corner bookstore, and there were very few bookstores, even in a city like Bombay uh, at that time. Delhi, in fact, I used to love and admire Delhi because they had so many bookstores. But Bombay had very few bookstores. Bombay was still Bombay by then at the time. It wasn't Mumbai yet also. So it was a very different world. And because of that, it was not possible to make a living just publishing fiction in those days. So basically, I had to find other means of survival. I wrote for television. I wrote a series called A Mouthful of Sky, which was on DD Metro at that time. And so the crime books I published were called the first Indian crime novels in English. I'm doing air quotes over here because that was not my claim. It was never my claim or the publisher's claim. You won't find it mentioned on any of the books. It's what the media claimed, actually. In fact, the phrase was first used by a reporter called Anupama Chandra in Sunday magazine. She was a journalist for Sunday magazine at that time, which was edited by Veer Sanghvi. And Anupama Chopra, as you know, is now a very famous film
Yes.
critic, actually. So she was a very highly regarded journalist. She claimed that they were the first Indian crime novels in English. And who was I to argue? So then I went on to write to survive and make a living, as I said, because I even writing the first crime novels in English in India didn't get me much income. I wouldn't have survived if I had continued writing the second and third and fourth and fifth crime novels in English. So I wrote a television series, which I was lucky to be offered at that time for Mahesh Bhatt and Amit Khanna at the time of Plus Channel. The series was called A Mouthful of Sky, and it also was called India's first television series in English, which also it was. And then I co-wrote Malaysia's first television series in English called City of the Rich. I've never seen it, so I have no idea how it turned out, but I was paid to write it. And one of my co-writers, again, see how you keep meeting people in your journey across time, and how differently our journeys turn out. One of the co-writers, who was a very, very junior writer at the time, was a young writer called Farhan Akhtar, actually. And today, of course, Farhan Akhtar is a famous movie
Yes.
star and a director and a producer of movies and everything. And we have met again, and he remembered working with me on City of the Rich, and I, of course, did remember, but he was one of many other junior writers. But I am happy to know Farhan, however slightly for that reason. So basically, I had to do television. I had to write. I wrote a lot of, or rather, Ghost wrote a lot of Bollywood scripts and a lot of other television films and series to make a living. I went on to write journalism, which was also something that always interested me because I believe that journalism is the best for the best grounding for a writer to learn how to tell stories economically, concisely, and accurately. And I wrote and broke front page stories for Times of India, Outlook, The Week magazine. I wrote columns and I did interviews like this one. I did several hundred, in fact. I wrote over 2,000, I had over 2,000 bylines, in fact, over a couple of decades as a journalist and a columnist. So I did all these things in order to survive, as a novelist while continuing to write novels. But it was very clear that just writing crime thriller fiction wouldn't sustain me. So I had to put it
Yes.
aside. And as you know, in time, I went on to write my Ramayana series retelling, which became very successful. And so I
Right.
became known as a writer of mythology and reteller of mythological tales. But that was never my plan, never my intention when I became a writer. But that's what I was known as, and I was happy to accept it. I'm very grateful for all the success and all the appreciation I've got for it. But eventually, I knew I wanted to continue writing crime fiction, literary fiction, and children's books, which I had started with. So you could say that I've finally come back to my beginning.
Right.
That's basically my journey.
Yeah. So now that you are actually doing what you really, had wanted to do initially. So I'd like to ask you about this thriller, A Kiss After Dying. Uh, it's very fast paced and intriguing. What did you find the most thrilling aspect about writing this thriller?
Uh, I guess you could say just entering this world, creating this world through the point of view of the protagonist. I'll try not to give anything away, so I will refer to
Right.
her as the protagonist. You understand what I'm doing here. Uh,
Yeah,
you know, people listening or watching this may not fully get what I'm talking about until they read the book.
of
But
course.
let's call this character the protagonist. And as you can see, I have the cover here behind me. Is at the background. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
So that's the cover of the book, and I have a copy of the book also here. Does it show properly?
It's getting a little blurred. Yeah, you can keep it in the center. Now it's visible. Yeah.
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 Okay. Okay. Anyway, so I just had to show it because I love this hardcover, the UK hardcover, and even the Indian paperback is pretty nice too. It's the same cover, the same design. So to answer your question, what I love about it is being in this character's mind and point of view, and living in her world for the duration, of the writing process. And that was actually for me the most thrilling part, the most exciting part, because as with my earlier crime novel, the one I mentioned, The Iron Bra, that was also a hard-boiled noir, which again, A Kiss After Dying is a hard-boiled noir, as
Right.
you can see from the ending, which is a very noir ending. It's a
Mm-hmm.
bittersweet ending. I won't say anything more again, but it's a bittersweet ending, and it's not entirely, because noir endings can be very bleak,
Mm-hmm.
very nihilistic and very bleak at the end. But in A Kiss After Dying, I tried to give the ending some measure of hope, some measure of completion, and because of that, I call it a bittersweet ending. There is bitterness and there is something sweet about it also. Again, I can't give anything away because it's a novel full of twists, shocking twists, and which have been appreciated by a lot of the reviewers and the readers. And I really enjoyed playing with the reader's expectations and using language and storytelling methods and techniques to play with the expectations and to lead them up the garden path and then deliver them into a very different zone uh, unexpectedly. So that was what I really enjoyed about writing A Kiss After Dying.
Right. So, sir, you just mentioned about how thrilling it was for you to get into the mind of the protagonist. So, the protagonist that you have is a woman, right? So, you are writing these long portions from the point of view of a strong female character. So, how easy or how difficult it was to write at length from the perspective of a female protagonist?
In a way, the act of writing fiction is an act of appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
Every character that a writer writes about, doesn't matter what the genre is, it may even be a non human character. For example, there are stories told from the point of view of an animal. A dog, for example, there are lovely stories told from the point of view of a dog, or a dolphin, or a whale, or an alien. Science fiction is full of characters that don't exist, robots, androids. So every character, even if you're writing a realistic character, let's say you're writing a novel, let's say you, Ronika, are writing a book. Let's say the main character is Ronika Wahi, right? And that's, but it's not exactly you, because when you tell the story, you will make up things that you
Right.
have experienced that you haven't done, right? When we write, for example, when we write about uh, a terrorist attack, how many of us have actually experienced a terrorist attack? When we write about a terrorist attack from a terrorist point of view, have you been a terrorist? I haven't. So
Right.
every character in fiction is ultimately an act of appropriation. Even a man writing about another man. Now, for example, a male writer can write about a male writer who is not him, who is a slightly different age, or slightly different family background, slightly different, or even very different. So it is, I would say, every character that one creates is a challenge. And I think it's very important to be able to do justice to that to be respectful of the culture and all the background that you are appropriating, even if you think it's your own. Even an autobiography, for example, you have to be
Right.
considerate about the other people that you're talking about in your autobiography. A lot of autobiographies, they talk smack, they talk shit about other people in that character's life and that person's life, right?
Mhm.
uh, do they have the right to do that? I would say not. There's a very famous series of this European autobiographical writer who's received a lot of praise and a lot of brickbats for his autobiography because he has based it on himself and his family, and his family is very upset at how he's portrayed them, his wife and his children and his relatives. So, for example, how truthful is even autobiography? So,
Mhm.
I think the most interesting thing about writing a character in fiction, unlike in an autobiography, is that what you have created is the character for better or worse.
Mhm.
Accurate is it to what? To, for example, a male writer writing a woman character. But if you think about it, women writers also write male characters,
Right.
right? Uh, Children's writers, for example, they're all writing about 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, but they're not 7 years
Mhm.
old or 8 years old. Just because they were once doesn't mean that they know what every 8-year-old is like or every 10-year-old is like. Every novel is populated with characters that are male, female, different genders, different orientations, different cultures, different backgrounds. So, in an ideal world where we would only write about one person, that is yourself, only stick to what actually happened in your life and what you actually know, and write about nothing else. So, I think that the moment you start writing, you are putting yourself into the minds and hearts of other people, whether you
Mhm.
like it or not, whether it's male, female, or any orientation, is the secondary question. The only question finally is whether you can tell that story and tell it well. And I
Mhm.
hope in case after time, the character that I created, and as you've seen, the
Right.
character that you think you're reading about is not the character that it turns out to be.
Right.
An act of deception over there.
Mhm.
There's an act of deception. And I would say that all fiction is an act of deception, basically, because you think that you're reading about that character, but that's an illusion. There is no such person. There is
Mhm.
no such character. It's a made up character. It's a made up world, basically. So all you're reading is an author's imagination, basically. And it's not accurate. How can it be accurate? Because how are you going to judge accuracy? I'm
Right.
not talking about things, basic things like, that you say, oh, the day was 36 hours, from morning to night. That is, but that also happens in science fiction. Even in science fiction, you have, days which are not our Earth solar days, which are different lengths and different durations. You have worlds which have 5 moons. So
Mhm.
the moment you start writing fiction, you're already stepping into the world of imagination, and you're already creating something which doesn't exist, which is not accurate. The only thing that can be accurate is whether it is true in the context of the story, and whether it is basically believable, credible, and whether the author has done it, like I gave the example of the autobiographical European writer, with a view to, you know, settling grudges in their personal life, or whether they've done it because they really have seen and are convinced of a certain story happening in a certain way from a certain point of view. And that's how I wrote To Kiss After Dying. It is this person's story. That is her world. That is her mission. That is her journey. And I chose to tell it.
Uh, a Kiss After Dying is obviously a world you have created, so it's something that's very close to your heart. So I won't ask you which is your favorite thriller. I am sure it is this one. But which is your second best, second favorite?
Oh,
Which other thriller have you really loved reading?
reading or writing? Uh,
Reading.
Reading. Okay. No, I wouldn't say my own book is my own favorite as a reader. As a writer, it's very different. Even as a writer, I wouldn't say A Kiss After Dying is my favorite. In fact, I've written another thriller after A Kiss After Dying, which I feel is far better than A Kiss After Dying. Far
Okay.
better. Yeah. Oh, yes, yes, absolutely. I never think that my published books are my best work. In fact, my published books are only stepping stones on my journey to trying to be a good writer, basically. And I don't know if I'll ever achieve that goal, but I am on that journey. So, as far as reading is concerned, oh my goodness, you have to see, I read so much. I read anywhere from 30 to 50 books a month. I don't always finish all those books. I would say I finish about 25 to 30 books a month, but I read 50 or even more sometimes books a month because I'm always looking for a good book, and I'm happy that I find so many. And in thriller, since the publication of Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, basically, I think we've seen an explosion of books in the domestic thriller, psychological thriller subgenre. And that's been wonderful because what she did was she achieved a breakthrough in writing crime fiction, in fact, in writing literature, uh, by creating, not creating, because she wasn't the first one to create the unreliable narrator, but by creating the unreliable narrator in a noir uh, world which operates according to certain unwritten rules which she hinted at, which she laid out in a way in the course of that book. Just as today we look to Sherlock Holmes for detective stories as the model, as one of the
Mhm.
early models, or Edgar Allan Poe as having created the earliest models of detective fiction, or in India, Byomkesh Bakshi or Satyajit Ray's Feluda. I'm not give a history of the detective novel, but I'm just mentioning some names that are, uh, iconic. So, but in that sense, Gillian Flynn marks a landmark. She's a landmark in her Gone Girl, especially, is a landmark in crime fiction because from that point on, everything changed. And after that, there's been such an explosion of great crime thrillers. So my personal preferences are not towards the, how shall I put it, the military fiction, the terrorist plot and the SEAL team, racing to the Middle East to go and, have these wild shootouts and the macho action-packed kind of thrillers, the kind that are more often made into movies. That's not
Mhm.
my preference. My preference is books like, for example, I think one of the best examples of the domestic thriller is a book called The Couple Next Door by Shari Lapina, which is fantastic. I think it's amazing what she did over there. And all Shari Lapinia's work, for example, I read it, I enjoy it as a reader, and then as a writer, I look at it again and try to figure out how she did it so simply, so well laid out, and such interesting characters. And for example, I wish Gillian Flynn would write another book because she hasn't written anything since Gone Girl. She's gone into writing television and directing, in fact. And there are so many other great writers working today in this. But so this particular genre, this subgenre of domestic suspense, psychological thrillers, is, I would say, as a whole, I embrace this category and I love it. One way to keep in touch with the books that I enjoy and that I like is to connect with me on Goodreads. I'm on Goodreads. You can search for me, and I, Mark, I add every book that I'm reading currently. I add it on Goodreads, and you can see the ones that I've given 5 stars to. So you'll find thousands of books over there, literally thousands that I've added because I've read I've long ago stopped counting, but at one point I remember I read something like 35,000 or 36,000 books, and that was some years ago. So I would have to break it down by subcategory and then by author and then by book and so on. And it would still be a long list. So on Goodreads, you can find all the books that I've rated 5 star. And sometimes on Twitter or Facebook or wherever, also on my socials, I will also shout out other writers, especially South Asian writers. I've even recently, as part of my publicity tour for Kiss After Dying, I did a piece. I think people can just Google it online. Uh, 10 best crime novels by South Asian authors. So that will give you a list of 10 best South Asian writers that I think are currently working in the genre. So I'm a great reader, and I think I would not rank myself anywhere in my list of best authors or best books.
uh, whatever books I have read of yours, I've really enjoyed reading them, and I'm hoping that the next thriller will also come out. So, if you could tell a bit about that thriller, also it will be great. And also, I'd like you to really talk a bit about the graphic novels that you're creating right now. So, if you could just tell about the upcoming works that.
Sure, sure. So the next thriller that that I've written already, in fact, because I write my books before I send them for publication to publishers. So right now it's under submission. That means it's gone out to publishers, and
Okay.
I haven't sold. It hasn't sold yet. So once it's sold, then I can talk more about it. Because very honestly, if unless it sells, there's no point talking about it. Because if it doesn't
Correct.
sell, it's not going to be published. And today, the publishing world is very, very tough. It's actually easier to get in as a debut author, because if you've written a fantastic book as a debut author, you the world's at your feet, basically. uh, it has to be a fantastic book, but whereas if you're an established writer, it's not easy getting your it doesn't mean that your next book will be published. So we have to go through the same process as any starting writer, and that means submitting your books to publishers, and publishers will not care about how many books you've sold before, the readership that you have. They only care about that particular book, whether they want to buy it or not. And so we'll have to just wait and see. So I won't talk anymore about that, but I will talk about, for example, I have to talk about the illustrated works and children's books that you're talking about, that you asked me about. Uh, I am working on a graphic novel. Again, the same thing applies, that until I finished it and I've sold it to a publisher, there's no point talking about a book that may never be published. But I am illustrating. I started illustrating a couple of years ago. I chose to specifically illustrate children's books because I love, as you know, I love telling children's stories, and that's the genre, one of the categories, sorry, not genre, that I started with at the beginning of my career, along with crime fiction. And I'm also hoping to do a graphic novel, which is a more literary graphic novel
Okay.
set in contemporary India. And I'm not sure whether it'll have genre elements like science fiction, fantasy, or be a more realistic literary graphic novel. But so it's a long way away from completion. So, but that's a more gritty, realistic, black and white kind of a noirish kind of style, whereas the children's work is more whimsical and more, I guess you could say, amusing, more humor based, basically. So based in children's books, and the more serious adult literary graphic novel, basically, is what I'm looking at. And that's basically what I have on the anvil. I'm also working on another crime thriller, which I plan to take up in a couple of months. But right now, what I'm working on is a literary novel. It's a
Okay.
very ambitious, very big literary novel set in India, in fact, set entirely in India. And that's the current project that I'm working on. Again, I hope it'll get published and get published soon, inshallah. So till then, that's all that I can say.
My best wishes to you, sir. And yeah. Okay, so I want to know your perspective on one thing. Do you think that there is something like a winning element to writing? Do you think writing can have these kind of elements that really make it stand out?
Absolutely. I think every author who succeeds, every book that makes it, when I say makes it, I mean not just gets published, because that's just one part. That's not even the start of the process.
Hmm.
Process of becoming a successful author really begins when readers embrace your work. That's when you start becoming. That's when your career as an author actually starts. It doesn't start with getting an agent or getting an acceptance or even getting a big book deal, even getting published. Those are not the beginning. The real beginning is when readers connect with you. And I think readers only connect with books and authors that have that something special, as you just pointed out. Uh, what that something special is will depend on the readers and what they're looking for at that point.
Hmm.
25 years ago, I mean, there was no big market for children's books. And then along came an author called J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. And that exploded the market. And today, children's books publishing is one of the biggest selling, categories in publishing generally. And that all started with Harry Potter, and also readers embraced Harry Potter. They embraced the way she wrote that character and those characters and those stories, and they found something extraordinary in it. That's why those books succeeded. And it's the same with any author. I have to say one thing, but today it's much harder for an author to achieve that kind of big success. In fact, many publishers, many people in publishing today say very categorically that it's impossible today to become a J.K. Rowling or a Stephen King or a mega best-selling author now. That time has passed. The reason is that social media and the internet and our communication has changed. So there's no longer that much attention given to just one book or one series or one author. It's divided among everybody. So because of that, uh, nobody can become the biggest author. There'll be many who claim to be the biggest selling authors in the world or the most successful or the most popular. But they all have this one thing in common, which is they have something unique in their writing style, which appeals to readers.
Right. I think that's this thing that you're pointing out is true for other fields as well. The opportunities have increased, and so have the challenges. So
Right.
yeah, so a final thing that I want you to talk about is, so you've had this, because you've had this long journey. So obviously you must have learned a lot about the craft of writing. But apart from that, are there other things that you've learned, something from a broader perspective, something about life itself that being engaged in writing has taught you?
Yeah, I definitely have. Uh, I would say that the biggest lesson that I've learned is that, first of all, just because you've achieved success in the past or even yesterday doesn't mean you'll be successful today or tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that uncertainty is an integral part of a publishing career. And to be an author, to be in the world of publishing means to accept that. You have to accept that. In fact, you have to accept the fact that you can be a success one day and you can be a complete, uh, nobody the next day,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. And the journey is constant up and downs. It's a roller coaster, and it's not like, for example, you think you're upward, you're going up and you're going to constantly go higher and higher. That's an illusion. That is a fantasy, basically, I would say. So that's the most important thing I've learned, that don't assume, never assume that success is taken, never take it for granted. uh, the other thing I've learned is that writing is wonderful. I love doing it, but life is more important. Family is the most important thing. The people that you have in your life, the people that you love who love you, your fam, your tribe, your people, they are far more important than the work
Right.
that. And I think it's more important to be successful and happy as a human being than to be successful as an author. And I don't really care if I don't become more successful as an author, if I'm not considered successful, if I'm forgotten even before I die. It doesn't matter in the least to me. What matters is that the people I love and who love me, and that love continues, and that outlives us all, basically.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing about your book and about your perspectives. Is there anything else that you'd like to share or any message that you'd like to give?
Uh, no, just I'd just like to say that be happy, find someone who loves you, or if you have someone who already loves you and whom you love, hold on to that person for all with all your strength, because that's the most important thing in life, and that is the purpose of life. That is the whole journey. That's what it's all about. There's nothing else. All this fame, money, work satisfaction, work life balance, as we call it, it doesn't matter. All that matters is loving somebody and being loved back.
Absolutely. If you're watching this video, do check out my review on A Kiss After Dying. It's on my book review blog, ronikavahi.blogspot.com. The exact link you'll find in the description box of the video. You'll also find Amazon links for the book. Do check it out. And if you enjoyed watching this video, please do like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.